The life and sad ending of Willy DeVille. Willy DeVille was born William Paul Borsey Jr. on August 25, 1950, in Stamford, Connecticut, to William Paul Dorsey, a carpenter, and Marion Elizabeth Meritt. He grew up in the working-class Belltown district of Stamford. DeVille quit high school and began frequenting New York City's Lower East Side and West Village. "It seemed like I just hung out and hung out. I always wanted to play music but nobody really had it together then. They had psychedelic bands but that wasn't my thing." In this period, DeVille's interests ran to blues guitarists Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, and especially John Hammond. "I think I owe a lot about my look, my image on stage, and my vocal riffs to John Hammond. A lot of my musical stance is from John," DeVille said. He credited Hammond's 1965 album So Many Roads with changing my life. As a teenager, DeVille played with friends from Stamford in a blues band called Billy and the Kids, and later in another band called The Immaculate Conception. At age 17, he married Susan Burrell, also known as Toots. DeVille struck out in 1971 for London in search of like-minded musicians, but was unsuccessful in finding them. He returned to New York City after a 2-year absence. His next band, the Royal Pythons, was not a success either. Said DeVille, "I decided to go to San Francisco, there was nothing really happening in New York. Flower power was dead." During 3 years, from 1975 to 1977, Mink DeVille was one of the original house bands at CBGB, the New York nightclub where punk rock music was born in the mid-1970s. Their sound from this period is witnessed by Live at CBGB's, a 1976 compilation album of bands that played CBGB and for which the band contributed 3 songs. In December 1976, Ben Edmonds, an A&R man for Capitol Records, signed the band to a contract with Capitol Records after spotting them at CBGB. Edmonds paired Mink DeVille with producer Jack Nitzsche, who had apprenticed under Phil Spector and helped shape the Wall of Sound production technique. Assisted by saxophonist Steve Douglas and a cappella singer The Immortals, they recorded the band's debut album Cabretta in January 1976. Cabretta, a multifaceted album of soul, R&B, rock, and blues recordings, was selected number 57 in the Village Voice's 1977 Paz and Jop Critics poll. Its lead single Spanish Stroll reached number 20 on the UK singles chart, the only Willy DeVille recording to ever hit the charts in the United Kingdom. The band's follow-up album, Return to Magenta, continued in the same vein as Cabretta, except that Willy DeVille and producers Nitzsche and Steve Douglas employed string arrangements on several songs. On this album Dr. John played keyboards and, once again, Douglas played saxophone. To promote the album, Mink DeVille toured the United States in 1978 with Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe. Return to Magenta reached number 126 on the Billboard 200, making it Willy DeVille's highest-charting album ever in his home country. He then recorded 2 albums for Atlantic Records, 1981's Coup de Grâce, on which Jack Nitzsche returned as a producer, and 1983's Where Angels Fear to Tread. Both sold well in Europe but fared less well in the United States. Coup de Grâce was DeVille's last album ever to enter the Billboard 200, peaking at number 161. Mink DeVille's last album, Sportin' Life, was recorded for Polydor in 1985. For this album, DeVille penned 2 more songs with Doc Pomus. The album was recorded at the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in Alabama with the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section, and DeVille and Duncan Cameron producing. The album was a hit in some European countries, entering the top 20 in Switzerland and Sweden. In 1986, DeVille filed for bankruptcy as part of what Billboard called a major restructuring of his career. He fired his personal manager, Michael Barnett, and announced that he would put Mink DeVille to bed and start a solo career. Consequently, Mink DeVille played its last concert on February 20, 1986, in New York City. In 1992, DeVille recorded Backstreets of Desire, the first of 4 albums he would record in Los Angeles with producer John Philip Shinale. For Backstreets of Desire, he was joined by David Hidalgo of Los Lobos, Efraín Toro, Mariachi Los Camperos, and Jimmy Zavala, as well as New Orleans musicians Dr. John and Zachary Richard and L.A. session musicians Jeff Baxter, Freebo, Jim Gilstrap, and Brian Ray. All music said about the album. Willy DeVille's Backstreets of Desire stands tall as his masterpiece as both a singer and a songwriter. DeVille's considerable reputation in Paris buoyed him up to make this disc. Backstreets of Desire included a novel mariachi version of the Jimi Hendrix standard Hey Joe that was a hit in Europe, rising to number 1 in Spain and France. DeVille did not have a recording contract with an American label in the mid-1990s. His next 2 albums, Willy DeVille Live and Big Easy Fantasy, were recorded for Fnac Music, a French label. Willy DeVille Live was a number 1 record in Spain. Big Easy Fantasy presents live recordings of the Mink DeVille Band playing with New Orleans legends Eddie Bow and the Wild Magnolias and remixes from the Victory Mixture sessions. By 2000, DeVille had cured his 2 decades-long addiction to heroin. He relocated to Cerrillos Hills, New Mexico, where he produced and played on an album, Blue Love Monkey, with Rick Nafi, a friend from his youth in Connecticut who had played in DeVille's first band, Billy and the Kids, as well as the Royal Pythons. In New Mexico, DeVille's wife Lisa committed suicide by hanging. DeVille discovered her body. He said, "I got in a car accident because I got crazy. I think I was somewhat taunting death because somebody who I loved very much died. And I found them. That's what that lyric in that song means. I cut her down. The next thing you know the police show up, I was in tears. I was in love with another woman and we were going through some hard times, and I got in the car and I wanted to go off the cliff. I was in the mountains in New Mexico. They came right around the corner head on. Do you know how big a Dodge Ram truck is? I broke my arm in 3 places and my knee went into the dashboard. It was bone to bone. I was on crutches and on a cane for about 3 years and I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. I was fucked up. I was ready for the scrap heap." Willy DeVille was married in the early 1970s to Susan Burrell, who was known as Toots DeVille. Toots and Willy had known each other while growing up in Stamford, Connecticut. They were married in 1971, and he adopted her son, Sean. Alex Halberstadt, Doc Pomus biographer, wrote about Toots, half French and half Pima Indian. Toots favored a pair of nose rings, snow-white kabuki makeup and a Renette-style beehive the color of tar. Shed once put out a lit Marlboro in a woman's eye just for staring at Willy. In 1984, DeVille married his second wife, Lisa Leggett, whom he met in California. She became his business manager. They lived near New Orleans and on a horse farm in Picayune, Mississippi. After her suicide in 2001, he married Nina Lagerwal, his third wife, who he met in New York in August 2000. They returned to New York City, where he spent the rest of his life. In February 2009, DeVille was diagnosed with hepatitis C, and in May of that year, doctors discovered pancreatic cancer in the course of his hepatitis C treatment. He died in New York City in the late hours of August 6, 2009, 3 weeks shy of his 59th birthday.